Welcome to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a production of LibertyNation.com, hosted by Mark Angelides.
In terms of monumental political events, it's hard to argue that 2020 wasn't big in a lot of different ways. Certainly there were no traditional major wars, and despite warnings of Armageddon, we're still here in one piece, but perhaps a little wiser and a fraction more jaded. Yet if we consider the internal shift that has taken place in the last 12 months, then the year everyone wished would end has been seismic. There's a wonderful poem by William Butler Yeats that started life as The Second Birth, but was published exactly 100 years ago in November 1920 as The Second Coming. This poem, the language it uses and the images it evokes, seem almost prescient. What we must remember is that this was written in the immediate aftermath of the First World War, and during the beginning of the Irish War of Independence. The first part goes like this, quote, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." End quote. I'd like to take a few minutes to examine some of the more memorable lines, but first let's consider the theme. Its imagery is chaos, but not mere anarchy. It is chaos that's been unleashed on the world by the world of man. When he writes of things falling apart and that the centre cannot hold, these are references to the war, to the battlefields of Europe and the bloody anarchy that ensues when the mind is dimmed by blood. Perhaps when we look around us at the world in 2020, we can see similarities to the last element of the stanza. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Look at the streets of major cities in America. Rioters and looters, violence in the name of race, destroying neighborhoods that people have built throughout their lives into communities, and then to see them spiral into bloodshed and fire. The worst, these people who burn and terrorize in the name of a puppet cause. It's their passionate intensity that drives them, yet it's not noble. It's not grand that they shoot black police officers and all to steal a television. And what of the best, those who lack all conviction? Consider the misguided misanthropes who turn a blind eye because it benefits the political cause they happen to be pushing at that moment. Those who refuse to call out the bad, those who disregard cities in flames as nothing but an idea. They are the failure in the system, the weak link that lets it all spin in the widening gyre like Dorothy's house in The Wizard of Oz. When Yeats wrote this, he was trying to show a separation between the times before and after the war. This was the Great War, the one that would end all others, or so he thought. And it should have been. We witnessed how destructive man could be and how all that came before, in truth, counts for nothing because we have at last revealed our natures. And our nature is in direct conflict with the image of ourselves built up over 2,000 years. 2020, despite not hosting a bloody war of a global scale, is very much like the time that Yeats writes about. We have torn our masks away. We know that gangs of violent Marxists can roam the streets, burning cities with impunity, and that those who we believed would protect us murmur platitudes, take a knee, and figure out how to profit politically from the destruction. They have no need to be secret anymore, and they can see their willing troops and their mere anarchy loosed upon the world. We must, of course, discuss COVID-19, the big C coronavirus. This has also been a pivotal point in the last century. We all had ideas of what a pandemic might look like, what governments might do, and how we would all react. And in reality, what happened was nothing like what we expected. People did not die in the streets. more than 99% of people survived unaffected. And for millions around the world, it seemed as though this were nothing but a media fabrication. But the destruction of liberty, now that was something that impacted us all. Perhaps we thought that our governments could not shut down our businesses. Worse even, put us in jail for daring to try and earn a living, for sending our children to school, and even for holding the hand of an elderly relative. Now we know better. Yeats writes, "The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned." The blood-dimmed tide was our fear, and our innocence, our naivety, is now drowned. We shall likely never consider the relationship between the government and the governed the same again. It was a shift similar to that of before World War I to after. The world can never really be the same again. The second part of the poem has a more religious overtone to it. We've moved from nature usurped by man and onto man usurped by the spiritual world. It goes like this, quote, "Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight, somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. A gaze, blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born." End quote. Dark stuff indeed. But the poem is part warning and part prophecy. Yeats says the coming beast is the culmination of a dream, 20 centuries worth, and yet that the time is right for it to become a reality. The idea of dreams, individual or cultural, as he suggests here, coming true as a theme not unfamiliar to the Irish poet. He once wrote that, quote, "The visible world is no longer a reality, and the unseen world no longer a dream." End quote. What better way of saying that we're at a point where the nightmares of our civilization are about to push through to reality? For 100 years, this poem has moved the hearts of thinkers throughout the world. It has been looked at as a unique symbol of its time, but perhaps its time has come again, as we awake from the stony sleep and see the beast, the offspring of man's departure from the natural world. It gazes upon us with a blank and pitiless stare.
Go deeper on the topic discussed in this video, head on over to one of these links here or go to our Liberty Nation Roku channel. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for Liberty.
The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production.
Available at Libsyn, Apple iTunes, Stitcher, on Roku, and other fine podcast providers.